Well, today we are going to, as we journey into God's Word, as we give thanks for gifts given and pray that God might help us use them in ways that align with His will for us, as we journey into His Word and just say, God, speak to us. Today we come to the fifth part of our series, Distinctively Different. And I'm thinking about when we're singing, you are perfect in all of your ways. That's why we're in this series. We know God has a different way, a distinctively different way than the one we see in the world. And so for each of the weeks leading up to this, and we're going to do it again today, we're just simply looking at another way we are to be different. And so here's what we want to talk about today related to that. How we deal with our relationships, especially those that are difficult, those that are conflicted, those that are struggling. In a nutshell, here's how Jesus wants us to be different than the culture around us when it comes to this. He wants us to be willing in the midst of conflict and strife. He wants us to be willing to be reconciled, or He wants us to be willing to at least look for the possibility of reconciliation. Now, I want to say this, it's kind of a depressing thought, but I just feel like I've got to throw it out there. We've got to be so careful in our world today. What we're talking about today does not apply to relationships that kind of border on abusive or kind of cross that line. I don't know if that applies to anybody here. It might apply to some of your friends as you think about their journey, physical or even emotional, psychological. The worst thing we can say to someone, thinking about what we're going to talk about today, when they face that is, hang in there, be reconciled. Because in those kinds of situations, what do they most need to do? Get out. And so again, any of you happen to face something like that in your life, man, I'd love to talk to you about it. Find someone else to talk to you. Again, I know that's kind of a depressing thought, but I just want to say that as we journey into this today. So we're going to turn again to Matthew chapter 5, and we are going to read today verses 21 to 26. I don't think these will be up on the screen today. I didn't offer them. Only 2 points today. Those of you who really like the fill in the blank, this wasn't a fill in the blank time, so find some space on your bulletin somewhere. Matthew 5, 21 to 26, if you want to follow along, you can turn there now, you can pull it up on your phone. Here again this week, we have Jesus using this particular speech pattern that sounds like this. You have heard it said, but I say to you. And just a reminder, when he says that, he's not saying that the Old Testament teaching that he refers to is wrong. He's not saying it's irrelevant. He's simply saying this, that there is a deeper meaning to be found in that teaching, that command, that passage, a meaning that we often don't even look for. In other words, he's just saying, look deeper. There's something here that you're most supposed to respond to. And so here are the words that we find today, starting with verse 21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Anyone who says to his brother, Raka, is answerable to the Sanhedrin. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, think about our receiving an offering a moment ago. If you're offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, your sister, then come and offer your gift. Again, wrapping that kind of reconciliation into our spiritual journey. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge. Now, here's what we want to do today. Knowing that the culture around us, in the midst of struggling relationships, conflict in relationship, knowing that the culture around us often says, just, kind of ignore it at best and fight fire with fire at worst. And certainly knowing That's not who Jesus wants us to be. With that in mind, here's what we want to do today. We want to consider two things that we need to understand if we're going to be able to be different in terms of what we're talking about today. Different from the world around us. So here's the first thought. First, we've always got to understand that Jesus means it here. He means it when he says, and at one point he uses the words, the fire of hell. He means it here, talking about judgment. When Jesus says that murder and tearing people down or killing and being angry with someone, guys, he means it when he says that, when he talks about these being equal offenses. Now that's hard for us. Why? Because when we think of sin, understandably, we think of it as resting upon various levels, right? Some sins are more heinous than others in our minds, right? They deserve more punishment. And yet, this is Jesus who's throwing this out to us, right? Kind of equaling things out. And he does that intentionally for a reason. Not so that we will think murder and killing are not that bad, right? He does this intentionally so that we won't let ourselves off the hook when we get caught up in the other things. He says this so that we won't let ourselves off the hook when we begin to tear people down, when we say, you fool, thinking of that language in this passage, when we bring anger to a relationship. Instead, what Jesus wants us to do, then kind of just passing those things off, is to raise the bar when it comes to how we relate to others. Now, hard as this is, here's the most effective way that we can embrace fully what Jesus leads us to here. By actually focusing on just the opposite of tearing others down. We've said for a few weeks as we've looked at his speech pattern here, instead of spending all your energy saying, I don't want to tear that person down, I don't want to be angry with them, a great way to work at this is to ask yourself every day instead, how can I build this person up? Man, that pushes you in another direction, and it takes care of that avoidance. How can I build this person up? In other words, one way to create reconciliation in our relationships, hard as it can be once they go bad, one way to commit ourselves to reconciliation is to make sure reconciliation is rarely needed in our relationship. So ask yourself first today, how can you best, with God's help, begin to focus on building up those around you, especially those with whom you face some conflict, division, struggle? How can you best, with God's help, begin to focus on building them up, especially recognizing that's part of what Jesus is calling us to here? Now, knowing that that's only a part of our call to be reconciling, here's a second thing we've got to understand if we're going to be able to consistently bring reconciliation to our relationships. This one is just as tough. Secondly, we got to understand this, that when the time comes for reconciliation, someone has got to take the lead. And this really is another way we're to be different than the world around us. In Jesus' mind, no surprise here, the one who's got to take the lead, according to Jesus, is us. One New Year's Eve at London's Garrick Club, British dramatist Frederick Lonsdale was asked by Seymour Hicks to reconcile with a fellow member of the club. The two had quarreled in the past and never restored their friendship. "You must," Hicks said to Lonsdale. "It is very unkind to be unfriendly at such a time. Go over now and wish him a Happy New Year." So Lonsdale crossed the room and spoke to his enemy. "I wish you a Happy New Year," he said, "but only one." Truth is, most days, most of us would rather do anything but this, take the initiative when it comes to reconciliation, because we know taking the initiative involves us owning up to some of the ways we behaved. It involves us confessing a bit. And for most of us, we don't want to do that. And yet here is Jesus telling us, verse 23, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, and the implication is he's got something against you for good reason. If you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go. Be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. And perhaps here, the words that are most important, simple as they are these. First, go. Because again, when it comes to reconciliation, there's always got to be someone going in order for the process of reconciliation to start. So secondly, ask yourself today, where do you, as you think about a difficult relationship in your life right now, where do you most need to begin to take the initiative in order for healing to take place? And really try to get specific as you reflect upon that today, this week. What are specific steps you need to take? Because it may be a gradual kind of thing, but be one who initiates, that you might be one who begins to create reconciliation where it's needed. Now let me just say this in closing, and then we're going to move to God's table today. This isn't easy stuff, understand that. Some of us who are gathered here today are not just thinking, again, excluding those extreme situations in relationship. We're just talking about more normal angst in our relating to others. Though some of us are here today who are not just thinking, I don't want to do this. Some of us are here today who are honestly thinking, Rob, good thought. Jesus, good thought. I can't do this. You don't know my situation. And you're thinking, I can't do this because someone has wronged you greatly. And if you shared your story, we wouldn't debate that. You're thinking, I cannot do this because someone has wronged you greatly and you don't think they deserve your reaching out to them. And maybe you're right from a human perspective. But if there's a little bit of that in you today, lest you just walk out and say, good thought, can't do it in this situation, consider this at the very least. When we didn't deserve God reaching out to us, what did God do? God reached out anyway. And so in the midst of your thinking, I don't know that I can do this, just ponder this. If he did that for you, then maybe, just maybe, with his help, you can begin to bring reconciliation to some situations where it is especially needed. Here's another way that we are to be distinctively different, by being people of reconciliation. Let's pray.